Welcome to the Wanderer's History Podcast and to the third part of the short history of Charles V, part of the Rulers and Monarchs of the 16th Century Mediterranean series. Before we continue, I'd like to remind you to please hit that subscribe button to make sure you never miss any new history material from the podcast. Let us resume. The previous episode ended with Charles's triumphal coronation at Bologna in 1530, the last papal coronation of an emperor. This ended a decade of turbulence both in the German parts of the empire, which became embroiled in religious and social unrest, showed by the emergence of Protestantism, the German Peasants' War, the factionalization within the empire between the Protestant and Catholic princes. With the coronation of Bologna, Charles hoped to have the situation somewhat settled within the Italian peninsula. France was becoming more encumbered by internal struggles of economic and religious nature. The papacy and Clement VII had to bow down to the emperor. Charles seemed in control of the situation for the moment. However, the next decade after 1530 would have many challenges for the emperor. This is because also in the east, the Ottomans had made gradual advances after Mohacs in 1526, which effectively partitioned Hungary. In 1529, Vienna was close to being conquered by the Ottomans. It is unclear whether Charles intended to relocate the conflict with the Ottomans by conquering Tunis in 1535, or if it relied on the context of the Eastern Mediterranean warfare between the Venetians and Ottomans, who were at peace since 1503. But it is clear that war in the Mediterranean ramped up gradually after 1535, the situation deteriorating during the reign of Philip II of Spain and the Battle of Djerba. Returning to 1530, the imperial diet in the free imperial city of Augsburg was an important event. There would be several imperial diets in Augsburg, partially a reason being the connection between the Habsburgs and the financially influential Fugger family, which contributed to Charles's election as emperor in 1519. At Augsburg, Charles's brother Ferdinand played an important role and was given authority by Charles. In truth, Ferdinand had a much better relationship with the German princes and electors of the empire than Charles ever did. The Diet of Augsburg aimed to resolve three large issues. First was the defense of the empire against the Ottomans, after what had been a close encounter at Vienna in 1529. Had it not been for the deteriorating weather and the late season, Suleiman might have actually conquered what was the heart of the Habsburg Austrian heartlands. Then the second part, and one of the most important documents, was a submission from Lutheran princes and cities of the Confession of Augsburg, a primary confession of faith of the Lutheran Church, and one of the most important documents of the German Protestant Reformation. There were 28 articles ranging from the Trinity nature of God, practices such as baptism and confession, to the role of saints and the interpretations of free will. This is where we see differences, for example, between Lutheranism and Calvinism. Within the Protestant movement itself, there would be frictions and disputes over many issues, such as differences between the followers of Zwingli and Luther over the sacrament. Negotiations were difficult and eventually broke down, leading to the creation of the Schmalkaldic League in 1531, which would last until 1547. The Diet of Augsburg had called a recess. Charles V recognized the Schmalkaldic League, and from 1531 to 1547, the League was able to last, initially as a coalition between Protestant princes such as John Frederick I of Saxony and Philip I, Landgrave of Hesse. That was possible mostly due to the fact that Charles had to divert his attention to the wars against France in Italy, but also the wars against the Ottomans in the Mediterranean. 1535 represented an important moment for Charles V and the balance of power in the Mediterranean. A large force and navy led by Andrea Doria, Alvaro de Bazan, Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, 3rd Duke of Alba, fought against the forces of Hayreddin Barbarossa, supported by a very small French contingent. The fighting was fierce, as Charles's forces successfully captured La Goleta, and then a slaughtering followed of more than 30,000 inhabitants of the city. Barbarossa managed to escape to Algiers. It was a costly victory for Charles, as Tunis would only last until 1574 in Habsburg hands, and also at Tunis, substantial casualties were recorded because of fighting and then because of illness that broke out in the camps of the Habsburgs. Another Italian war emerged between 1536 and 1538. What didn't help it was actually a triggering factor was the fact that Francisco Sforza died in November 1535, leaving no heirs. France saw this as an opportunity given the aftermath of the War of the League of Cognac. This war caught Charles slightly off guard in northern Italy, where France wanted to take over the Piedmont region as well. They would make modest gains in the region. In 1536, the French concluded a formal alliance with the Ottomans, with a large Franco-Ottoman fleet threatening Marseille, but also Genoa. Andrea Doria had made sure that the city had adequate protection. This conflict would overlap with the Third Ottoman-Venetian War of 1537-1540. In 1537, the Croats, which were part of the Austrian Habsburg Empire then, lost the siege and Battle of Clis. This led to a nearly spontaneous Ottoman attack against the Venetian-protected Corfu. Despite the Ottomans having over 300 ships and 25,000 troops, the Venetians were actually able to repel the Ottoman attack. The situation was getting alarmingly dangerous, fact recognized by Pope Paul III. The Truce of Nice was negotiated, which ended the Italian War of 1536-1538, temporarily pacifying relations between Charles V and Francis I of France, in order for Pope Paul III to form the Holy League between Venice, Spain, and the papacy against the formidable strength of Suleiman's Ottoman army and navy. The Holy League of 1538 was short-lived, mainly because of the fact that Charles decided to have Andrea Doria and the Genoese fleet take part in a war that Doria was not really interested in. Apart from a few islands in the eastern Mediterranean, such as Chios, under Genoese control until 1566, Genoa had little interest left in the region. It is worth remembering that Genoa and Venice had been for centuries rivals in the Mediterranean and Levantine trade. The Venetians still had a substantial commonwealth comprising of islands and kingdoms like Cyprus, Candia, Tenos, which were crucial cogs to its maritime empire and wealth. The fragility of this Holy League would become all too obvious at the decisive Battle of Preveza in late September 1538. Doria's constant delays, reluctance to risk his ships, and overall lack of dedication and zeal resulted into a catastrophic defeat for the Venetian contingent led by Vincenzo Capello, and for Venice overall. The Venetians had to accept a costly peace with the Ottomans in 1540. 300,000 ducats plus several territories in the Morea and Dalmatia had to be given. Preveza confirmed Ottoman supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean, fact which would allow Suleiman to challenge decades later the Spanish at Jerba in 1560, another pivotal moment in the Mediterranean military history. But for the moment, in 1540, Charles would have been satisfied with the outcome of the Ottoman-Venetian War. He mimicked a contribution to the Holy League at the call of Pope Paul III. Genoa and Doria did not suffer any major military, naval, or financial casualties. In retrospect, if we look at the composition of the Holy League, it was never going to work. On the one hand, Charles V, heavily indebted to Genoese banks and bankers, having to resort to a private fleet owned by Andrea Doria to participate in a war involving one of Genoa's main economic rivals, that being the Venetians. Interesting parallels can be drawn between Preveza and the naval battle of Lepanto, where another Holy League had to face an incredibly powerful Ottoman navy in 1571. there were, of course, differences, and a huge factor was the presence of Don John of Austria at that battle. A lot of on these battles and the main actors was discussed in the previous series, such as Ottoman Titans of the Mediterranean and the Victors of Lepanto series. So make sure to check those out as well. In any case, returning to the subject at hand and to the conclusion of this episode, after 1538, Charles V would have a brief but much needed period of pause and respite, at least until 1542, when we see the emergence of yet another war against the French. The following decade would see many challenges for Charles, ranging from war against the French to a Schmalkaldic War of 1546-47, which was a preview of events to come in the next century, which unfolded through the 30 Years' War, the Diet of Regensburg in 1541, and of course, in 1545, the Council of Trent would be milestones for both the Empire and Charles. We will talk about all of those in the next episode of the short history of Charles V, part of the broader series Rulers and Monarchs of the 16th Century Mediterranean. Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to make sure you never miss any new material from the podcast. And until the next time, all the best.